Hello and welcome back to Newbie Debate. In this installment of the Novice Debate 101 series, we're going to be talking about argument components, which is a relatively big subject, but in short, it's going to be talking about the four major uh, parts of a large argument and debate. And most arguments in debate that are going to end up mattering towards whether or not you win or lose the debate are going to be these large arguments that are comprised of the four components. And so we'll go ahead and go over those. So, no matter what the argument is, if it's a big offensive argument that's going to win you the debate, and we'll talk about what offense means in debate specifically later, uh, it's going to have these four parts. Sometimes it'll only have three, but if it only has three, then it's because it doesn't need this third one, and we'll talk about some situations in which that is going to be the case. We'll go ahead and start from the beginning. So the way that you kind of want to think about it, or that I think makes it easier, is linking these two together, uniqueness and the link. And so we'll go ahead and talk about those two first. So uniqueness is the question of whether or not an argument is what we call unique. And the reason why it's called that is, say you're on the affirmative and you're debating an affirmative where we pass some policy that increases the budget by like $2. But then yesterday we passed a policy that increased the budget by $6 trillion. Now, you can make the argument that increases of the budget are bad and that might cause some negative side effects. But if you only increase the budget by $2, but yesterday we increased it by however many trillion I just said, I forget the number I used, but then it's not fair to say that any negative consequences that might come from increasing the budget are the result of that AF plan that only increased our federal budget by $2, right? Because it's like you only increased it by two when realistically the thing that's probably going to cause the bad stuff is that $5 trillion increase. And so uniqueness is where you prove that your arguments are unique, or where you argue why your opponent's arguments are non-unique. It's where you make claims about the way things are now. That's what I have listed there. It's a debate over how things currently are entering into the argument. And so you want to prove why the bad thing that they cause is unique and wouldn't happen otherwise, or you want to prove that whatever good thing, if you're on the affirmative, whatever good thing you cause wouldn't happen without the affirmative, in order to prove that it's something that's caused by you directly. And so next is the link. The reason why these two are linked together in a way, funny connection there, but the reason why they're linked is because the link is talking about what changes. So this is what's happening currently, or how are things currently right now, and the link is what's going to change about that as a result of typically the affirmative. It's where you explain why the affirmative plan. So in the case of like what we were talking about on the uniqueness, the link would be that they increase it by $2. Now let's go ahead and have like a more realistic scenario. So if we were talking about like budgets and such, the uniqueness would be where you argue why the budget's fine right now and why we aren't doing things that are going to cause any long-term harm when it comes to increasing the budget. And then the link would be your evidence about why the AF plan is going to increase the budget. Or sometimes in some situations, it's like you don't really need a piece of evidence for the link because the arguments kind of just, they admit it to themselves that the link is there, but usually you want to still have some piece of evidence. Like in the case of, say, in cross-examination, you're like, how much do you increase the budget by? And they're like, $1 trillion, which I mean, they're probably never going to say, but let's say they do say that. your link argument or your link evidence in that case might want to say why increasing the budget can cause negative side effects, because it's like the question is not do they increase the budget at that point, but it's why is that bad, and what is that specifically going to change. Like you can maybe have an evidence that says why increasing the budget by $1 trillion is uniquely bad. And so yeah, you want to prove why the affirmative typically causes something to change. If you're on the affirmative and you're reading an advantage, the link would be what does the AF do to resolve something bad that's happening now? Because like on the affirmative, you're trying to solve a bad thing. And so the uniqueness would be why is what's happening now bad? And the link would be like, how does the affirmative fix that thing that's happening now that's bad? So these two are kind of connected as well. They offshoot off of the link. So if the uniqueness is what's happening now and the link is what changes, the internal link is going to be what comes in between the link and the impact. It's a question of, okay, so the affirmative links, but what is something that happens as a result of them linking that maybe isn't the end all be all bad thing that happens, but is rather a necessary step in that like train of logic. So say we'll stick with the budget disadvantage example that we're talking about here, where the link is that you increase the budget and the budget's good now. The internal link would be maybe not some sort of war that immediately happens the moment that we increase the budget by even $1, but the internal link might be that increasing the budget causes economic collapse. Like say you have this really cool piece of evidence that says that right now things are fine and dandy. As long as we don't start spending any more money, we'll be fine. The internal link might be a piece of evidence that says why increasing spending dramatically through something like the affirmative would cause economic collapse, which bridges between the internal link and the impact, because the impact in that scenario might be that economic collapse causes nuclear war, and that causes extinction. And so if you were to say, uniqueness, the budget's fine now, they increase the budget, nuclear war, extinction, people would be like, okay, how did we get there? And so that's why the internal link comes in. And so, like I just stated, the impact is typically the final thing on that chain of arguments. It's the final bad thing that's caused by the affirmative linking, or if you're on the affirmative and you're arguing that the uniqueness is bad right now and we fix that, this is the bad thing that would happen if we don't fix that. So like the example that I put here is, say you win, that the AF causes increase in the amount of like global warming, melting of like specifically like on the Arctic, like melting of permafrost in the Arctic. And the internal link might be in that situation that increases the spread of pandemics and diseases. And then your impact would be that disease spread causes extinction. So generally, your goal when making arguments in debate should be to have any number of these components, typically all four, sometimes just uniqueness, link, and impact if there isn't as much of a jump from the link to the impact, and make one large argument that can result in being a reason why you're going to end up winning or losing the debate. So we'll go ahead and go through some of these a little bit more in-depthly. So, like I said, uniqueness is a question of how things exist currently. The reason why you need uniqueness for your arguments is to prove why the thing that your opponents do, the link, is something that is going to cause the bad thing to happen, the impact, and that wouldn't happen otherwise. If you just have the link and the impact, then you don't win uniqueness. Then all you've proven is that they contribute to something bad that wasn't already going to happen anyways. So it's like we said earlier, if you prove that, yes, they do increase the budget, but there was a ton of other things that are going to increase the budget that are already happening, then all you've proven is that maybe they make something that was already going to happen extra. Or like maybe that you, and that is probably best case scenario for you, because more realistically, you prove that something was already going to happen anyway, and they made some sort of contribution possibly towards it happening, which sounds even worse. And the best case scenario doesn't even sound all that great either. And so the only way that you're able to get around this issue is if you argue why your impacts are linear. So if your impact is nuclear war, nuclear war is something that if it happens, and that's really bad, and it's going to probably, we only need one nuclear war before we're like, okay, this is pretty bad, and this is probably not going to get much worse. But if you have, say, a argument where your impact is that people are forced to mine hazardous materials that cause them to get cancer or suffer, or any of those types of impacts that are like, it's an amount of suffering typically, you can argue that you causing more suffering is meaningfully worse. Like, we can tangibly be like, okay, 5 people suffering is better than 100 people suffering. And if 5 people suffering is inevitable, like something has already happened that's going to cause 5 people to suffer right now, but the affirmative increases that number to 100, like, we can recognize why that is worse than the instance that's guaranteed of 5 people suffering. So if it's something that the difference that they add on causes something that, like, we can recognize is meaningfully worse, and we can recognize that it's worse, then you can argue a linear disadd is what that's called. I hope that made sense. You'll focus a lot more on these types of disadvantages that focus on brink-based impacts that are only going to happen once, and you don't have to worry about quantity. But there are going to be some instances in which maybe you just want to argue that the AF causes more of something that's bad, and we can recognize that more of that something is bad, and they should not do that. Next is going to be the link. Like we said earlier, it's where you prove why your opponent's plan does something bad, or that you do something good that changes something that's bad that's going on right now. So the uniqueness is that the economy is doing well right now. Then the link might be an example of why the plan or the counterplan causes the economy to decline or get worse. The link should be as particular as possible. So you could have like very generic links, and you should have generic links for disadvantages when you're especially planning on reading them in worst case scenario type of rounds. If you're a novice and you're debating with a packet where there's a limited number of affirmatives, you don't have to worry about this as much. But as you adventure out of novice division, or if you don't have a packet at all, then you might see yourself in scenarios where people read affirmative cases that you've never heard of before. And in those situations, as long as those affirmatives are topical, then they should have, you should have a disadvantage that can link into any topical affirmative. Like a disadvantage where as long as you do Arctic development, you're going to link into it. If the topic's different than this, obviously the link would just be whatever the topic is. And so you want to make sure that you have what is called that generic disadvantage, where you're able to rely on it if you're in one of those worst case scenario, I'm not prepared type of rounds. But whenever you can, if you have specific links to different types of affirmatives, those are a lot more particular, especially if the affirmative that they're debating is widely recognized to be a pretty like generic affirmative case. Like if this is something that everybody's reading this AF, or like most people are reading this AF, then you should have some more specific links to it. And judges who are familiar with the topic and the way that people are reading affirmative cases on that topic are going to be a lot less lenient with you whenever the AF is just pretty objectively topical and core of the topic, as we call it. Yeah, so that's the link. Next is the impact, which is the final argument component. I skipped the internal link here because we're going to go over that later. But the impact is the final like objective argument component. It's the one that you need every time. So if we, sticking with the economy example to give us another one, because we used spending earlier, if you argue that they make the economy bad, the impact is where you explain why making the economy bad is important. So typically an impact will deal with some larger issue, whether it be diseases, nuclear war, climate change, poverty, starvation, or some other bad thing that is caused by the unique change that they cause to the status quo. And so specifically in the case of the economy, this is one of those examples where you do need an internal link, because the internal link would be like the economic collapse. It'd be the same internal link as the spending disadvantage, because it's like they're very similar. It's just rather than spending causes economic collapse, it would be whatever their link is to making the economy worse causes economic collapse. So like we said earlier, saying that they make the economy slightly worse causing nuclear war sounds a whole lot worse than saying they cause the economy to become worse, that causes economic collapse, and that economic collapse causes nuclear war. So we don't need to trample too hard on this. But what does this look like? Sometimes you won't hear people read these points out. Like sometimes you'll hear people go uniqueness, and they'll read the uniqueness. Link, they'll read the link. But that's not a rule. You don't have to do that. It does make it easier. I'd like to think as a judge, especially in a world where we disagree on a lot of things, and a lot of judges view the world differently because we're all human beings. And so having things clearly identified out with something that is widely agreed upon, uniqueness, link, internal link, impact, these are terms I don't hear a lot of disagreement over what they are, but identifying them so the judge doesn't have to be like, oh, is this a uniqueness argument? Is this a link argument? Is this an impact argument? Now, that's probably not going to be an issue, but I think it just generally sounds better, and people don't have to spend the 2 seconds thinking of what is this argument before they throw it on their flow. And also, in the same vein that you don't have to label them out, but I think you probably should, is that some people won't read certain components. You might see a scenario where a team doesn't read uniqueness. And whilst I'm not the most familiar with / not the biggest fan of that style of reading debate arguments, there are people who will say that the uniqueness is so obvious, quote unquote, that it's presumed until the negative argues otherwise. They won't read a uniqueness argument in their 1 and C, and then if they decide that, hey, we might go for this, and you argue uniqueness, then they'll read a uniqueness card. But if not, they won't bring it up initially, and they'll bring it up later in the debate if you question it, which is a style. I'm not the biggest fan of that. Maybe you are. Maybe you will be. Maybe your coach is. And if that's the case, that's not the end of the world. But just something to think about, that you might encounter some people who view debate differently. And just because they view it differently than maybe you, or at the very least myself, but maybe you as well after listening to me talk, that doesn't necessarily mean it's incorrect. And you'll still have to make an argument, be like, they don't read the uniqueness in the 1 and C, and so take that into consideration in the uniqueness debate. Whenever you're evaluating uniqueness, remember that we brought it up first, blah, blah, blah. Maybe your judge agrees with me and is willing to take that into consideration if the uniqueness debate ends up being a close debate. Just something to think about. That not a lot of things are rules, but if you're able to justify why something should be the case, in this case, reading uniqueness in the 1 and C, then you can argue why that should matter to some tangible degree. So responding to arguments with this in mind, anytime they make an argument against you, whether it's the affirmative case is advantage or a disadvantage, you can think about it like this. So on the uniqueness, so you can ask the question, are there other things that might cause this? Or is this already happening? So you make non-unique arguments where it's this uniqueness for this disadvantage is already happening. On the link, you could say, do you actually cause this change in status quo to happen? You could say no link is that would be that situation. Or even better, Are you able to explain why maybe you move things in the opposite direction? Like they say you caused this bad thing. You say, no, actually, not only do I not cause that bad thing, but I actually make us work the other way. Like I make things better in the aspect that you're specifically talking about, and that would be a link turn. Then on the internal link and impact, you can ask yourself, one, is this already happening? Because if it's already happening, you can argue that the impact itself is non-unique. And if it's already happening, does it matter if there's more of it? Once again, some questions about uniqueness, you can say that maybe the impact happening wouldn't be the end of the world or wouldn't be as big of a deal as they say it is. That would be referred to as a no impact argument. Or you could say that that thing happening is good, which would be an impact turn. There's a couple other different types of things. Generally, you can non-unique or make some uniqueness questions there. And then on the link, internal link and impact, you can turn typically all these. One thing you do want to worry about, we'll talk about this. I'm going a little bit longer here than I hoped. I keep always finding things to say on these, but you don't want to link and impact turn in the same debate or on the same disadvantage specifically, because it's if you argue on the link that we cause this disadvantage impact to not happen, and then on the impact you say that that impact happening would be a good thing, then you've what we call double turned yourself, because you say that we prevent. So like in the link, rather they say you cause X, you say we prevent X, but then you also say X is good. And so now you say, basically with these two arguments together, we prevent a good thing, which is that X, because you've now said that the impact happening would be good and you prevent the impact from happening. And so you prevent a good thing from happening. So you don't want to do that. I think this is the last thing here. You might hear this be referred to as a link chain. It's pretty common terminology for it because it's the four things. These little folders here is what we use. Sorry, my cat just sneezed. Uniqueness, link, internal link, impact. They're chained together because if you're missing one of these, like if you're missing the internal link in a situation where you need an internal link, then you don't have a full chain. If you're missing the link and you just go uniqueness, internal link, impact, you very much don't have a chain. Uniqueness, link, internal link, no impact, you kind of have a chain depending on to what degree the internal link matters, like on its own without the impact. Don't have uniqueness, then you've just proven, like we said, with a linear disadd, if it's not something that matters that we have more of it, then it doesn't matter at all. But yeah, so it's a chain because they're all connected together. One leads into the other, and you very arguably need all four of them in most situations. And so whenever you're able to view arguments like this, you can perceive large quantities of arguments because there might be like 2 or 3 different arguments here and 1 argument here, maybe 2 arguments here and like 3 arguments here. That's a lot for like a disadvantage. Usually just 1, 1, 1, 1. But maybe that is the situation. You have a ton of different little arguments that all form one big argument that's saying the AF causes something to change that's bad. Or the AF causes something that's bad to change into something that's good, if it's an advantage. And then that's one big argument, and those are the arguments that you want to focus on. And so that helps you know which arguments to focus on that are smaller to help you win the big picture. So remember, the goal of policy debate is to win the big arguments that can connect back to the ballot. Too many times, like I just judged a novice debate just the other day, too many times they'll focus on the small issues that don't end up in them winning the debate. Even in the best cases of scenarios, they don't win the debate if they win that argument, but they'll still focus way too hard on it, and that's bad. Don't do that. Don't be that novice. Focus on these bigger picture arguments. Thank you so much. Sorry, I really tried to keep this one short because it's probably one that should have been short, but I really like talking, and so I might have to do one of these that's just a shortened version of all these things. But if you really like learning about debate, I'm going to tell you basically everything you need to know. So Tune in next time. Talk about something fun. Don't exactly know what that is, but we're going to be working towards hopefully going to some tournaments soon. Thanks. Bye.